And now I will share my screen and get started. So just feel free to jump in on any questions as we go through it. Okay. And let me just make sure it's going. I think it is. It's my first time doing Facebook Live. So, all righty. So let's start with the slideshow. All righty. So we're going to talk a little bit about K-12 communications during COVID, which is definitely different, and everything's turned upside down. And so let's take a look at what we know to be true and what might work in this unusual time. So just to let you know who I am, who's this person doing this webinar, but I've been in marketing and PR in the Detroit area, working with schools and universities across North America for 13 years. I'm also the author of 8 books, with the 9th coming out in February, and I'm the mom of 14, so 3 are in high school, 1's in college. And I teach English at University of Detroit Mercy. So I'm on the teaching side as well as on the marketing and communication side. So that's just who I am. And by the way, if you're looking for good podcasts, Make Meaning Podcast is what I host, and I would love for you to check it out. Lots of educators are featured there. So we're going to take a look at how we make K-12 comms manageable at this time. It's hard enough to communicate in a normal year, and now people are sort of chaotic and they really want more touch points and they want more information, and it's really hard to know on a day-to-day basis how everything is changing. So we're going to look at how we make that manageable and why this might actually be a good time to reevaluate your story and take a look at your marketing strategy, so that maybe you can reinvent what you're doing and draw people to your school or your district because of these new conditions. So let's take a look first at what issues we are facing today. So we're going to talk a little bit about the issues that school communicators might have in normal times. But right now during COVID-19, we have this big debate about remote learning versus in-person learning versus hybrid learning. And then of course, which I didn't even mention on this, but the presence of pods that are popping up and all of the equity issues that surround all of these choices. One big challenge is to not get political as a district, because somehow this pandemic has become very political. Then we have the mental health concerns of parents and of students and of teachers. We're juggling a lot of things, we're wearing many hats, and mental health has never been such a big issue as it is today because of all of these converging issues. Then we have parents working at home, but having to juggle their children's at-home learning as well, or different learning schedules for schools that are meeting. And that's a real challenge too, because how can they be focused on their work, but focused on their children 24/7? It feels like 2 full-time jobs. And that makes it really hard on everybody in the house, especially when teachers are working at home parents as well, or even, juggling their own children's learning. And so how do we create one cohesive message that represents the entire district and responds to everybody, especially when there's so many different perspectives on the pandemic, on different approaches to learning, on what we do next? There's so many different opinions, and most of it is driven by emotion. So how can you as a school communicator have one cohesive message that really reassures everybody and keeps the district on track? Is this time to market your school or your district, or is that tone deaf to do so? Is this an opportunity, or is it just simply a cluster? Let's see what we think. So here are some issues that we face as school communicators when there isn't a pandemic. First and foremost is attracting students and families to your district and keeping them there. So that retention issue is really big as well. Finding enough resources to do all the things that you want to do and make sure that the learning can happen the way that you want it to. We also face the need to fulfill student needs and parent demands, and also support teachers through all of this. Sometimes all of those needs and desires are conflicting, and we want to find a way to satisfy everybody, all the constituents in the district. And then of course, we want to communicate well with maybe a small team, maybe one person, maybe there's no team. And a lot of districts have literally one person who's manning everything. And that makes it really, really hard. So how do you do that without the extra resources? And finally, one of the biggest issues without the pandemic is what truly matters versus a perception of what matters. And so today we're plagued by things like test scores, achievement gaps, equity and access. And some of these issues are more important than others, but the perceptions may not align with what truly matters. So these are the issues that we have anyway, in addition to all the other issues that we just looked at on the other slide. So it's kind of a headache, right? So let's look at this idea of a marketing education. It's an interesting concept because public education is open for all Americans. And so you would think, why would we market? But there's so many school of choice districts and schools that we have to let people know that we're here. And then we're competing with private education, with homeschooling, and this year with people who never would have homeschooled before, creating pods, draining resources that wouldn't have happened in a normal year. So if we look at the landscape, there are 98,000 public schools in the United States, and there are 34,500 private schools. So approximately a quarter of all American children attend a school other than the one that they're assigned to, which means there's a lot of choice happening. And then if you look at the remaining 75%, there's a good chunk of that whose parents choose where they live because of the schools. So there's so much choice going on in education that marketing it is almost essential. We never thought we'd have to do that because people just, generations ago, they grew up and they went to the school down the street and there was never a question, but that's not the case today. So marketing our school districts and our schools is super important. And it's actually important right now too. Sometimes we see schools marketing through all of the extras, all of the bells and whistles, or beautiful new building or extracurricular activities. And I'm going to suggest that to win families, you actually have to simplify. And especially in the pandemic, we're seeing the need to get back to basics. So that means you have to know what you are selling and understand that you are selling education. So what matters? We have to think about, who are your constituents? Who are your consumers? What are they desiring? And that may be a very emotional thing. So they may be desiring reassurance that their children will not be bullied, or they may be looking for a place where they know their children will learn well enough to be able to get into a desired university or college. Or it may be that they want more one-on-one attention. And again, these issues can be very different from family to family. And so it becomes incredibly clear that we have to understand the audience with razor sharp awareness, know what it is that they're seeking, and understand and accept that that may be emotionally based. And then we have to figure out how what we have to offer in the schools and in the districts can reassure them and speak to those desires. Now, not every family who could come to your schools is an ideal constituent. And that is another thing that in marketing we have to accept, that it's not for everybody. And so there are just going to be some families who are not satisfied, and that's okay. And so we have to find out who is our ideal audience and how do we speak to them so that we create a synergy, a win-win for the district as well as for the family. So I think this is a great time to build a really compelling communication strategy, because everybody is suffering from enrollment and sort of a dizzying spiral of uncertainty, and we don't really know when that's going to end. And so what better time than now to reevaluate what stories you're telling and try to figure out a narrative that's going to work to carry you forward. So this is a great time to vision, to think about, what does your district stand for? What do the different schools have to offer? And to look at some of those strengths and to spin some stories out of them so that you can build strategies going forward. So the first step is to create a centralized communications team. And if you only have one person in the whole district who is managing communications, it's still okay to create sort of a team or an advisory board to brainstorm and to get some other voices in. So bringing in maybe a couple of principals, some teachers, some parents would be wonderful. And maybe even, somebody from the superintendent's office, just sort of have it representing all different aspects of the district and have some brainstorming sessions, even if it's just every few months that you meet and you get insight from other people from their perspectives on what they see as the strengths and the opportunities in your district. It's also a really good time, if you haven't done it, to create a crisis communication strategy. So this is something you always need to have in place, and there's no better time than this current crisis, but to have a strategy so that you can respond when things go topsy-turvy as they are now. So we've been seeing that now for like 8 months, and we're going to continue to see it through this academic year, and we may be different after this. So a lot of districts will hire out their crisis communications, because then they can have a team that can guide them and advise them and respond quickly. So that is something to look into, but I think that right now, while there's a little bit of calm, it's really good to develop that strategy. You also want to make sure that you're communicating regularly with, your consumers. So not just when there is an issue, but you want to set up some regular communications that are two-way streets. So a lot of times school districts and individual schools will send out newsletters pushing out information and saying, this is what we are doing. This is how we are sharing information with you, but it's not necessarily a conversation, and it needs to be. And so getting in front of people, asking questions, having links to respond and to make this a two-way conversation is a really important way to sort of take the pulse of what's happening amongst your constituents. And so think about, you might be sending a newsletter weekly to current parents and students in the district, but what if you sent a newsletter monthly to everybody in the region who could potentially be part of your school district, just sharing information and educating them on issues and opportunities and things like that, just to build relationships. That's a really great idea. And then also thinking about making an ask in your regular communications. So if you're a school of choice district, or there are opportunities for other people to come in, why not include that in your regular communications? Refer your neighbor to us, bring a friend to a tour, whatever it is. When you ask, people will respond. The other thing to think about now is to provide reassurance. So that's not really coming from a lot of directions, and people need it. People are at really high levels of anxiety right now. Tensions are unmitigated and without end right now. And so if you can provide a calming voice and some reassurance that some things are status quo or some things are happening without a hitch, I think that would be really powerful. And that wins people into that relationship and deepens your connection. I would also review your communications channels and consider whether or not they're serving you. So a lot of different schools choose to be on every social media platform because they're there. And that may not be the best decision. So it might be better to do really well at one social media platform than to try to be on 3 and do kind of an okay job. Same thing with, email, blogging, any different channels that you have. I would take a look at them. I would put them under the microscope and see if you are building two-way communication, if you have a handle on that channel. If you need outside help for one of them or another, take a look and see who's around to help you, and think about how you are using it to serve you and your constituents. So these communications channels, again, need to be two-way conversations. They can't just be pushing out. They have to also be going back and forth. And so are you truly using them in that way? And if not, how could you do that? Lastly, a huge part of a communication strategy for schools is internal communications. So we often forget our internal constituents. There's several different populations that are internal constituents. So one are your existing parents and students. And they are not only consumers, but they are potential referrers and brand ambassadors. And if they're really happy with what they're doing and you're featuring them, then they can share it to others and people will see, and they're sort of spreading the word of mouth marketing, which can happen strategically if you put that as a focus. The other internal population are your staff and faculty. And it's really important that you're communicating to them and with them on a regular basis. And so that's something that you want to make sure you're doing. If you're not, it might be time to start that. So whether that's an internal newsletter or a private Facebook group for staff and faculty or whatever it is, but just to make sure that there's a sense of community amongst your staff and faculty and that they feel heard and seen. They also are referrers. They can bring in new employees, they can bring in new families. And if they feel taken care of, that will happen. So all of these should be part of a school communication strategy. And it's really important at this time to make sure you have one that's robust. So the next thing to think about is, what is your brand as a school or as a district? And a lot of schools don't think in this way, but it's really important to, because you are a brand. So schools are a microcosm of society. There was a really great interview on Aspen Ideas to Go recently that I would encourage everybody to check out. But they talked, it was the superintendent of Chicago Public Schools who was interviewed, and she said that schools are a microcosm of society, so they reflect what's happening. And we see what's happening right now. We're in a really interesting time. So think about what your school or your district stands for and how you want to be known. And are you deliberately putting those messages out there? It could be a really good time to revisit your messaging, your story, your narrative that you're sharing about the district, and maybe tweak it, maybe rewrite it so that it reflects the values that you want to be conveying to the community. And if you have never actively cultivated a brand, now is a great time to do it. And really the sky's the limit. You have this blank canvas and you can take a look and say, what do we stand for? How do we want to be a leader in the community? What are we educating people for? And it's really interesting because I listened recently to a podcast series called Nice White Parents. It was by Serial. And it was about this one particular middle school in Brooklyn, New York. And it was over the course of 60 years. And they looked at segregation and diversity and equity and inclusion. Really interesting series. But in one of them, they talked about what is the goal of public education? And I found that to be a fascinating question because I never really considered it. And I don't know if anybody working in schools today has thought about that. What is the goal of public education? So they referenced a film that was made in the 1950s by the New York City Board of Education. And it was a 25-minute long film. And it didn't include any children or any classrooms or inside any schools, but it featured all of these adults, all white, and they were adults in the world, and they all had graduated from public schools. And the message of this 25-minute film was that public education is to teach democracy, which was really interesting. And I don't know if we would answer it the same way today or not, but it's a good question and conversation to have. So if you do convene that committee of constituents within your district, I would ask that question and have a really lively conversation, because your goals should be driving your communication strategy. What are you trying to achieve? Are you trying to build enrollment by 10%? Are you trying to build active citizens? What are you trying to do? And everything about your brand and your communication strategy should really revolve around that. So another thing that your communications should do right now in this era of COVID is build connection. People feel very alone and they feel very isolated. And there's all kinds of fear and emotion circulating because we just don't know. This is a novel virus and people aren't sure, is it going to affect me? Am I going to lose people? What's the long-term outcome? Will we move on from this? And so if you can be a voice that shows care and concern and compassion and that you understand what people are going through, then you build that relationship as well. It has to be authentic, but understand where people are and build that connection by being compassionate. Everybody wants to matter. They want to know that they're not just a number in your district, that they are individuals and they're seen and that they have a role and a place. And everybody also wants to know that they're going to be okay. So if the schools can convey that message, then all the more reason that they want to be there as a part of that community. So consider if perhaps this could be a teachable moment. We have a lot going on right now in our country. We're plagued by a pandemic. There's a lot of racial inequity and outrage that is bubbling to the surface. It's been there for centuries, but right now there are some 23 million people who have participated in some way in a Black Lives Matter protest or movement activity in the past few months. That is more than any other social justice movement in our nation's history. It's more than civil rights in the 60s, and it's more than suffrage in the early part of the 20th century. That means that people are agitated, and this is an important moment. And make sure that when you're looking at your brand, that you respond to what is happening. We have this pandemic, we have racial relations, we have new ways to deliver education. So we're questioning all of the original methods that we've always known, and we're trying to reinvent what we do and looking for equity and access all the while to make sure that nobody is forgotten, that everybody has food and they have shelter and they have safety. These are big issues. And so think about whether or not this could be a teachable moment for your district, and your communications could really be developing some thought leadership and making a stand. That's really important. Big issues, but who better than schools to sound off on them? So something that I started to think about when I was preparing this is, what is education for? And I always like to get to the why behind what we do when we're trying to build a marketing strategy, because our goals should drive it all. So some things that I'm going to suggest, and you may have others, and again, this is a great opportunity for a conversation within your community, are to be seen and known. So when you go to school, somehow you stand out in ways that you might not at home. To become the person you're meant to be. I think that's a big one for all children. To find your voice and develop your skills and talents. Also to build confidence and to make connections, build relationships. And then of course, education should be a human connection, and it should be a place that is safe. So there could be others too, but think about what is education for? And now we translate all of this to the different communications channels. So let's take a look at a few different ones and think about how we can do things differently at this time. So on social media, make sure you're speaking to your audience and with your audience, not about yourself. So again, what do they need to hear from you and how can you push that out there? Try to say what's not being said. I had a conversation yesterday with a bunch of schools in a workshop that I'm teaching, and they were talking about wanting to make their student population more diverse and how do they put that out there when their classrooms are rather homogenous. And I said, why not be vulnerable and be honest and say, this is what we're working toward, but we know we're not there yet. And just say what's not being said instead of trying to put up a facade. I think it's really important on social media to acknowledge fears and feelings and be out there about it. And I think also it's really important to show up with the issues of the day in meaningful ways as a contributor, as a voice to all of these things that are going on. If you're blogging, I would invite different perspectives. So do you have different teachers represented on your blog, administrators, students even, parents? Think about inviting different voices into the blog so that you have more participation and then of course more readership. Share personal stories, so successes, triumphs, different anecdotes. That's a great opportunity. I always think of a blog in sort of like when you go on a vacation and you take 200 pictures and you fill an album with all these pictures, but each picture is a moment and a memory of the vacation. The blogs are the moments. And so the whole thing becomes an album of your district, but each blog is one memory, one moment. And so think about what personal stories you could share. And also tell real stories about real people that are really relevant in this moment. So again, some of those issues we discussed earlier, use the blog to sound off on them. And by the way, I love to repurpose this material. So if you're writing a blog, pull from there for your social posts and then share it in an e-blast and use that content widely so that you're not giving yourself extra work, but you're making sure that all audiences hear the same messages again and again. And if you're not blogging, now is a great time to start it. It'll help bring some SEO to your website. It will invite traffic and also builds thought leadership within your district. If you're pitching media and you think that now really isn't the time, think again. It's a great time to pitch and they want to know how schools are doing, how students are doing, how are we managing in this new time. So think about pitching stories that show the human side of your school or your district and be bold, be the voice that's out there saying, here's how it's working and here's how we stumbled and how we recovered from it. Don't just tell the good stories, tell the real human stories. And also set yourself as a leader for other educators. This is how we're doing it. Why don't you try it? Again, dare to tell untold stories, dare to be honest and put things out there. And then of course, show how you're different and the different ways that you're innovating to meet the challenges of the day. Don't forget email and text communications. It's really important as we are more isolated right now. So stay in touch just to let people know that you're there. You want to stay in front of them so they keep you front of mind because we have very short attention spans and very short memories. Ask questions. So that's a great way to encourage interactivity and invite responses so that you can have conversations with people in the district, even sending out surveys every so often about how people are doing, about mental health. I'm just checking in. I think it will be appreciated and it will help you to keep your finger on the pulse of the district and to check in human ways. So I know that there were some churches in the early part of the pandemic that had teenagers writing letters to the seniors who were members. And that's a really cool thing. It's just a human touch. And especially because seniors were so isolated. So would it be possible for you to have some of your high school students check in with members of the community in more human ways? And that connects the generations and it also builds some compassion across different constituencies. So something to think about. And finally, for your website, at any time, but especially now, you want to change the homepage frequently so that it's speaking to the times. So maybe it's just adding a slider and it's updating with opportunities and events and important notices, but something timely should be on your homepage at all times. It should speak to people's concerns, but also make it easy for them to find the resources they need. And they should be able to get where they need to go in at least 2 clicks, no more. So think about looking at your website as a dynamic, living, breathing thing that you are constantly adding to and making relevant and resonant. So after this, if you'd like to book a free 30-minute coaching session with me to look at your own school communications, there's a link to do so. And I would be happy to have some time with you, and we can look at what's happening in your district and see how we might be able to devise a plan that speaks to it. And that is really it at this moment. Those are our social links. Please follow us. And this is being broadcast on Facebook Live at the same time. So we are eager to hear from everybody. So what questions do you have?
Well, that was fantastic.
Thank you.
I took lots of notes.
Oh, I'm so glad.
Yeah, I have some ideas. So we're kind of unique where I know a lot of the media stories have been schools that have gone back and it's been a nightmare and the kids are all crowded and all that. So in our district, we're doing half days with small groups.
Okay.
So for the last 2 weeks, we've had elementary students, like my second grader, my son is at school today. He's in a small group. There's like 10 kids in his class. So he's, they're distanced and all that. And it's been going really well. So we've, this week we started middle school coming in, and then next week the high school students start coming in for some assessments to see where they're at. But, I think that's definitely a story that's not been out there, that people are coming in and it's working.
Yeah.
There's a lot of look at it kind of blowing up in their faces. They should have went virtual kind of stories out there. So
yeah. So that's a great story to reach out to media about, from a lot of different angles. And I would, I'd reach out to the TV stations, radio, print, and just see who's interested and start to build those relationships. I'm happy to give you some names and emails if you'd like, and we can do this online, for sure. But it's just great to put that out there and say, hey, this is happening, and then stay in front of them. And if you're interested in doing a story on this, I can connect you with the right people. And I think that'd be fantastic.
And I have some contacts. I know we got a lot of media coverage in the beginning because we did a drive-through graduation. So we got a lot of coverage for that. That was kind of a unique one. And then when we were one of the first schools to say that, or first districts to say that we were going to offer a completely virtual option if people wanted it. So we did get some relationships built that way. So I got some cell phone numbers of reporters. So I'll be sure to use them. But no, just thinking about, getting those stories out there. And then also the idea of, on our newsletters, asking for feedback and making sure that it's relevant and stuff. And I know, like, one of the things I thought of today when I got the email again, like, they're supposed to do a self-screener before they come into the building, fill out this quick little form and verify that you're feeling okay. And the link keeps getting lost. People keep losing the link, and we have to constantly text it to them and email it to them. And I made a little video on my phone of like how to add a link as a button on your home screen. So that you could just easily get to it. So I'm like, I think that would really probably help a lot of parents like me, that in the morning going, oh, I forgot it. And then you got to sit there and you got to like dig it out and you got to find the link. And
that's awesome.
So I like that idea of closing the loop though on the communication and asking for feedback and listening to it and seeing what people are thinking.
Yeah, I love the idea too about sharing success stories, because we see so many stories right now about things that are not working. And, my older son is in college in Minnesota, and they are doing a great job of having in-person classes and maintaining a safe campus. Now they're in a small town, and they really have, they had a great system developed, but there's a university that's doing it. And so many are not. And so I think it's great when we can set it up for success and show examples so that hopefully others can follow suit, and maybe we can get more kids back in school.
Yeah, because I think it definitely, it's weighing even on the staff. That's what they're seeing too, is that all these, it's just all negative. And, and I feel like I'm constantly like, no, you guys are doing a great job. And like, we're doing as best we can. And I know people are quick to jump on the one thing that doesn't work and go, see, it doesn't work. We shouldn't have did this. And it's like, but there's so many things that aren't working.
See, that's a great story. I would write something about that in a newsletter.
Yes, I was actually working on our newsletter today. So I'm
perfect. I would do a story about that, like, you may complain that this isn't working, but look at the 12 things that are,
and especially like, I'm seeing like other districts. I saw on Facebook, one of the districts near us is having like a parent organized a protest rally riot thing outside their admin building. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like just so they can go back to school. And it's like, well, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. We're going to make it work.
Yeah.
It's going to be different.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. Kristen, it's so great to meet you and thank you for participating.
Yes,
And if
thank
I
you
can
for
help,
doing that for me.
my pleasure. If I can help in any way, you know where to find me.
All right, thank you so much.
Sure. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.